Have a nice day. Okay.
No, I can't. Yes. Guess it's 6:02, so good enough. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kate Schoenholz, and we're here today to talk about veterinarians' roles in disaster response with perspectives from Dr. Whitlock and Dr. Long. I just wanted to share a couple of things with you before we get started with their talk. One, OSU DAM Vets is sort of an unofficial group of people here that have been working to coordinate some education and training seminars for veterinarians and our veterinary teams. It consists of myself, Jen Sargent, who's not here tonight, Kelly Sears, who's sitting right over there, Kimberly Hoyt-Warren, who's actually working in the ICU currently, but may be connected online, and then Leah Streb sitting over there. And really, we welcome anyone who wants to participate or help. We're sort of, I guess, making this up as we go along and trying to pool in experts like Dr. Long and Dr. Whitlock to teach us and coach us along the way. And we're also working to try to develop a response within our local community so that we have a plan for ourselves and our animals. And my thing is not moving it. Like I mentioned before, I put the question mark around this beaver. That's not our actual logo, but DAMVET stands for Disaster Action Management Team. We're also open to suggestions if people aren't into that. And we are working in partnership with the Oregon Department of Agriculture, who is responsible for overseeing, activating, and also coordinating the training for OVERT, the Oregon Veterinary Emergency Response Team. A couple of events that are upcoming. June 18th, it's a Saturday event that's going to be all day. It will be involving Dr. Green, who is the man that wrote the book, Animals in Disaster, literally, as well as our own Dr. Ryan Schultz, who's going to talk about humane euthanasia and depopulation techniques, and we'll have a wet lab demo associated with that. But we're Oregon Horse Council is putting on. It's a technical large animal emergency rescue training. It is for, first responders, not just veterinarians, although I have been hearing rumors of some veterinary specific training that's going to be offered in addition to that, and that's in October. And then to here at OSU utilizing the AVMA designated core competencies for veterinary first responders to guide us in putting together some additional events. We hope to do these quarterly from here into the foreseeable future if that model ends up working well, so that we get people together. There's good networking opportunities, and we're also educating ourselves along the way about appropriate disaster management and response in terms of the veterinarian's role. But tonight, the best part, give a brief introduction of Dr. Long and Dr. Whitlock, and then if everyone can hold your questions until the end, we should have plenty of time to go over as many of them as we can possibly get to. So Dr. Long, he is a practicing veterinarian in Lynn County who has been a member of OVERT since it was actually started. He brought the book here today to prove it to us, if anyone wants to take a peek at that historic artifact. It's not that old. In requests for service over a variety of different events. This has included the Superstorm Sandy shelter care in 2012, avian influenza farm and barn cleanup in 2015, and then the California Campfire shelter in 2018. Who's going to speak second. She is a practicing veterinarian in Lane County, that's L-A-N-E, who's been a member of Oregon's Oregon's Veterinary Emergency Response Team since 2008. I don't know if she brought any historic artifacts to share today. And she's been a key member of the Lane County Animals and Disasters Task Force and was instrumental in efforts to respond to the Holiday Farm Fire in 2020, as well as animal response efforts during the 2018 Campfire. And she's been instrumental in drawing up Lane County's response plan for animals in disaster. And it sounds like they have a deployable disaster response trailer that's fully stocked with medical supplies. So Dr. Long, I'm going to close out my presentation and you can, yours is this one. You have to read. Yeah, and then you just have to flip the little switch. Should be all right.
Testing me. Oh yeah, sounds like we're up. So yeah, with this.
Is it shared?
That's great. It's a blank slide to start with.
Oh, the Zoom is in.
Oh, okay. Introductions. I just want to say a big congratulations for Dr. Kate and Dr. Ryan for setting this up. I think it's really important, and obviously by the number of people that have joined this, both online and in person, that's great. It's certainly higher than I maybe anticipated, but it's obvious the need is here. So again, thank you guys for doing this. And I guess in September 2020 really brought that to forefront that, yes, we do need some of this. I remember starting way back when, in 2004, I remember the previous Lynn County emergency manager, his comment was, it's not if a disaster happens, it's when it happens. And that kind of rings true thinking back to September 2020. And I guess we're probably all kind of waiting for the big one, the hurricane, the earthquake that potentially is a real threat to us. And so, why get involved with disaster response? And I suspect everybody here has a reason that they're here. But for me, it started back with Hurricane Katrina. And two things got me interested back then. One, my son was in the National Guard at the time. He was deployed down, his unit was deployed down to help. And so he brought back telling stories and things that they'd done, which sounded really kind of neat and interesting and something that I thought would be good to get into. And then I also vividly remember the pictures, and Mary, I think, is going to talk about that as well. People refused to be rescued if they couldn't take their pets. And so that changed everything. And Mary will talk about the Pets Act and how all that changed. So those are the two things that kind of got my interest. And about that time, OVERT started. And I brought the original training manual from 2004. And I think OVERT was really set up really initially as a way to respond to animals or animal disease disasters as opposed to natural disasters. And then at one of the first OVERT meetings, somebody talked about working at one of the hurricane reliefs and shelters, and it was through the Health and Human Services, a thing called INVERT, which is still in effect, although not real active at this point, but National Veterinary Response Team. Then it was back when I was going to Western states, the USDA had a sign up for NAHER, National Animal Health Emergency Response Corps. And they were just keeping a list of people who, if there was an animal disease outbreak or problem, they had a cadre of people to call on. So I signed up for that. And I also took the CERT training. I think Mary will talk about that. I think certainly that would be one of the first things that I would do is find out in your county, is there a CERT team available? And that stands for Community Emergency Response Team. And it's really meant to be a extender of the first responders, firefighters, and police. And it gives you a real basics into what a disaster response looks like. It helps the counties because they have people that have had some training, decreases their liability. And certainly it can be quite helpful. So I'd certainly encourage that. And then even way back when in 2008, we had a Lynn Benton emergency response group. OSU was involved. Dr. Craig Rowe was the point person way back when. But, there's a lot of training initially, but then nothing happened for a while. And of course, that all changed in 2020. So if you're sitting there like I was when I first started to get interested in it, it's, well, what does it look like? What's going to happen? What am I going to be doing? What kind of time frame am I going to be gone? What should I bring with me? What's the housing going to be like? So there's lots of what's and questions. And so the quick answer to that is you're probably going to be in the ops section, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the length of time is variable. It certainly depends on the disaster. It depends on the situation. And it also depends on your availability. How much time do you have to spare? Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe short notice. Most disasters are, although some are a little bit longer. I was going back through some old emails. It was April 20th, 2016 that the avian influenza outbreak, April 20th, 2015, that the avian influenza blew up years ago back in the Midwest. And they put out a call for volunteers. And I actually didn't go until July. So, sometimes you have lots of notice, sometimes not very much notice at all. But what do you bring with you? Well, again, depending on the situation, if it's an animal shelter, bring the things you use every day. Stethoscope, thermometer, otoscope, ophthalmoscope. I always bring a paper reference, although that probably dates me now that there's so many things available online, but I always try to bring some of that with me. And usually when I talk, I was throwing some disclaimers. And the disclaimer on this is that these are my observations. They're probably not the official response that you may get in training, but it's just observations. And again, it's mentioned I was back from Sandy back in 2012. That was with Health and Human Services. And then 2015, it was Iowa. That was an animal disease problem, and that was with the USDA. And then we went to OVERT. The OVERT team went down to California in 2018. And then I had a very limited response at Lynn County. But I guess I would say that I probably see things differently than many folks. And my kids would certainly attest to that because they think sometimes my things are way off. But so one of the first things on disaster response, it's really important to understand the ICS structure. I guess my days in the Army made it a little bit easier for me, but it's really the framework on how all disasters, how agencies coordinate. And so the ICS is really important. In a couple hours online, you can figure that out pretty quickly. Lots of jargons and lots of terms, acronyms. But probably the biggest thing is the thing called span of control. In the ICS, or Incident Command System, there's typically one boss, the incident commander, and then there's several sections. And it's kind of, unless you're unusual, most people can't handle more than 4 or 5 inputs at any one time. If you have 10 or 12 people reporting to you, things really get jumbled. So it's really important to understand how the ICS works and to know where your place is. And the neat thing is, at least from my perspective, if you have one boss, whatever your job is, you have one boss that you report to. There's a plan of action for the day so you know what you're doing that day. So just, again, understanding the ICS is really critical to understanding. And so what is the ICS and what's ops? I said veterinarians probably be involved in an ops situation. So that's really the operations. So if we look at this structure, and I lifted this off the internet, there's an incident commander. He's the guy in charge. And in a small disaster, that person might do all of these functions. But that incident commander has 4 different people responding to him, basically, or reporting to him. He has the operations section. That's probably where most veterinarians are going to be, unless you're somebody like Ryan, and then you may be the incident commander in a larger outbreak or a larger situation. And then there's a planning section. And I guess I would say the ops people are the ones that do the work, the day-to-day activities. The planning folks are plan for the action. They plan what resources are needed. So they're the ones doing the planning. And the logistics, their job is to make sure all the supplies, people, and resources are needed. And that's what you're considered in a disaster. You're a resource. And as Mary said earlier, probably one of the most important resources, but everything is typed by resource. And as a veterinarian, you're probably going to be involved with animal care to some degree. And then there's finance and administration. So again, most veterinarians, veterinary technicians are going to be in the ops section. You're going to be the person taking care of the animals in let's say a hurricane, there's a shelter that's set up. So that's what you'll be doing most likely. Let's see, we got to advance this. So then timing, what kind of time we're on. And that really depends on the situation. I mean, and it depends on when you're called up. And probably the respondent in the situations I was in, the early responders would have had a much different experience than I did. And I can only imagine what it would have been like setting up that shelter after the Campfire. And with Campfire, just as an example, we got there in December. The fire happened, 1st of October? 1st November.
November 8th.
Yeah, so we were there 6 weeks into it. So I can imagine that the people taking the animals in had a whole different situation than we did. They had immediate injuries, burns. Where we were there 6 weeks later, we were there taking care of animals that had been in the shelter for 6 weeks. We had lots of disease problems, lots of stress-related issues, and taking care of bandages or bandage changes. So, depending on when you get there, the situation is going to be a lot different. So it's hard to make a blanket statement that you'll be doing this. It just depends on when you get there, and again, how long it's been going on. And that's kind of, remember that disaster response kind of follows a hierarchy. First, it's a local response. If that local response gets overwhelmed, then it goes to the county or the state. If that gets overwhelmed, then it can elevate to the federal level, although that's becoming less and less likely, it sounds like. And then just one of the things to kind of keep in mind, if you are wanting to be a responder, and I hope everybody here is, you really have to have your disaster plan in place. So you have to think about, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So, one of the first things you would do is get your disaster plan in place. I never have a vehicle with less than half a tank of gas at home. And I have a couple 100 gallons in the storage tank. I have a couple of generators. My wife and I probably have enough food to last us for a year at our place. And I always have plenty of beer. I don't want to make sure I run out of beer. So again, get your disaster plan in place first, and then you can start doing these other things. So that's, I guess, message I'd leave with you. It's a lessons learned. when I first got involved, I thought veterinarians would be in charge of everything. But, that's probably not going to be the case. We should do what we do best. And I was really impressed when I went back to New York City. The ASPCA had set up this shelter. And again, disaster happened 1st of November. We got there in the middle of December. And so we were in charge of providing health care to the animals in the shelter. It was a couple hundred cats, a couple hundred dogs. And I always like cats, so I always volunteer for the cats. That's my thing. But we had a totally different situation there than, again, because we came in late to the game as opposed to really early in the game. I suspect that was a much bigger thing to take all those animals in. And these pets were there because their owners had lost their houses. They were flooded out. And so it was really a temporary boarding facility. There were not many unknown animals there. But I was impressed with the ASPCA that there was never a record lost. We knew where every animal was at any one time, and it was very well organized. And even at the Campfire, besides the veterinarians that went down, there were several shelter staff that went down, and they were really invaluable. So I think to get in the mindset that at least a major, large disaster, as a veterinary technician, you're going to be taking care of animals. You're probably not going to be setting up shelters. Now, in a local regional, you may be, and so it's good to have that skill set, but we should do what we do best, and that's take care of animals. And there are other folks, and initially, ASPCA, I kind of lumped in with a lot of the other welfare groups, but I was very impressed with the ASPCA. I got some pictures. So again, now to a little bit of each of the disasters and what we actually did in those disasters and how it played out. In Sandy, there was a hurricane superstorm that hit New York City, a lot of flooding. And initially, the state and local folks came in, but over time, that support waned, and so they called in the Health and Human Services, the National Veterinary Response Team. Established when we got there, and our goal was, our job was to take care of the animals, discharging some actually, but after 6 weeks in the shelter, you see lots of upper respiratory infection, cats not eating, diarrhea, and a lot of chronic reactive canine influenza. So this is a picture where we were. This was downtown Brooklyn, an old warehouse in Brooklyn, New York, 1508 Herkimer Street. And you see the ASPCA was great because they had lots of volunteers that came in and fed and watered the animals. And so I took these pictures when it was kind of a quiet time. This is really normally a hubbub of activity with people coming and going, feeding and watering cats. And so a typical day for us, and most responses I've been on, they're 12-hour days. And they're not physically demanding necessarily, but they're taxing on a person. So we would arrive at 7 o'clock, we'd have the morning briefing, a little bit what happened the day before, what the plan was for the day. And then from there, I had the cats, so I would go around and make rounds of the cats, all the kennels you see. And most of the time it was crates, carrying crates that were set up, cardboard in between to dampen the sound. It was pretty noisy in that old warehouse. And we would make our rounds, look at the animals that were there. The staff would usually have, the people that were feeding and watering would usually have a list of cats that maybe were sneezing, maybe had diarrhea, some other issue. And so then we would check those animals out. We had many animals that were on maybe a 5 or 7 day course of treatment for an upper respiratory infection or diarrhea or whatever. And so, that pretty much filled the day by the time you go through that many animals. And because it was an open warehouse, our exam area was kind of a caged-in area, so the cats didn't get away from us. But it can get pretty noisy in the shelters when you've got lots of dogs and lots of cats. So anyway, so these more pictures of the wards. We had an isolation ward where we had some canine influenza outbreak there. And then the more mundane things, maybe. Worked 7 to 7. We got on the subway at 6:30. Took a half-hour subway ride. We stayed at a really nice Courtyard Inn hotel right at Times Square. Great place. It was right at Christmas time, and I still remember they announced the Heisman Trophy winner that night at Times Square. We didn't get to it, but it was still kind of fun to be in that. And I'd never been to New York City before. And maybe that's maybe another side benefit to disasters is sometimes you get to places you haven't been before and some neat things to see. very little time for sightseeing. It was Christmas time, so we get to see the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center, all the lights downtown New York City. And it was amazing. I had in the past always avoided New York City because I just didn't want to go to New York City, but I was very impressed. And the people one day were just overjoyed, the locals. They had gone 24 hours without a homicide. First time in months that had happened in New York City. But anyway, so again, there can be some side benefits of deployments. Now, the influenza in Iowa in 2015 was a totally different situation because now this is an animal disease issue. And again, we were talking earlier, it happened about 7 years ago today is when I got the call that they were looking for people. And this was NAHRE, National Animal Health. Again, all these places use the ICS. And so it was easy to fit in and understand how things were set up and who was in charge and who you were reporting to. So with this, there was a couple of weeks classes online at home, and then we went back to Ames, Iowa for a week training. And the neat part of that was, side benefit for veterinarians at least, we went to the Holy Grail of Labs, National Veterinary Lab in Ames, Iowa. Spent a week there. It was pretty interesting. Then after that, it was a 3-week deployment to Northwest Iowa. Again, 12-hour days. That's what we worked. Again, here, lodged in a Holiday Inn Express, which, sounds kind of great, but a month in a Holiday Inn or a month in any hotel is not a lot of fun. The fun wears off pretty quickly. And my job there, I was a case manager for 7 poultry farms that had previously been depopulated. And so there's not a lot of pictures here. Unfortunately, they didn't want us to take pictures, but my job was to coordinate. Let me go back. Yeah, here we go. My job was to coordinate efforts that the USDA had already been in and depopulated the birds. The cleanup was in process in these barns. And my job was just to make sure that everything was going as planned. So not necessarily direct animal care, but more biosecurity, problem solving, making sure that the people that were hired to clean had the supplies they needed. USDA was communicating what was going on. And composting, it was amazing composting. I mean, there were piles of litter of chickens that was 1/4 mile long, 20 foot wide, 10 foot high. We're monitoring temperature to make sure that it hit the right temperature. So again, it was quite interesting. I thought that I really came late to the game again on the depop and removal had been done. I suspect the people that were there at the beginning would have a totally different view of what happened when the outbreaks were happening and they were trying to sign contracts with the poultry owners. It was fascinating to me. I thought I knew livestock production, but I'd never been to Northwest Iowa before. And I was amazed. One of the facilities I was in charge of was a complex, 16 barns, 200,000, had 200,000 layers in each barn. 3.2 million birds on that farm. Just amazing the infrastructure. And I never understood really commercial poultry raising until I saw those facilities. The stacks of, and it was just interesting talking to the poultry owners, how they were dealing with all this. So quite interesting. Holiday Inn Express. So this is one of the buildings that was involved. I'm doing this. Keep going here. Some facilities had packaging, but it was just pretty phenomenal to see that. Campfire, I probably will stop here pretty quick because I don't want to run over my time, but Mary's going to talk about this as well. But again, it was December 2018, probably 8th or 10th of December. We went down for about 10 days. And again, we were later in the disaster there. So we were there at a shelter. Our job was to ensure the health. Mary was the ops chief for us. She had 3 veterinarians working for her. I was taking care of the cats. Todd Browning was taking care of the dogs. And I can't remember who was Gene was taking care of the poultry and other. And so we had several hundred dogs, cats, rabbits, almost everything. Ferrets, I think there was a ferret or 2 in there too. And I guess the thing that struck me there was there was a lot of NGO involvement, and it wasn't as organized as I was expecting from Sandy. So again, you got to be prepared to be flexible because you never know what you're going to run into. And the facilities that we were in were pretty basic. Actually, we didn't have running water in our treatment area. So, but there again, we were taking care care of kind of similar thing. I'd make rounds in the morning. The cats were there. Actually, shortly before we got there, the National Guard came in and they were feeding and watering, and they turned out to be very good. This is our accommodations at in California. We're at the airport in Chico, and again, we were well prepared. We knew we were going to be in tents. These 12-person tents actually turned out to be more comfortable than I thought they might be. Very wincing at that.
We were exhausted.
It really was a nice full heated. It rained several days there, but we were dry. What's that?
It only flooded twice.
Yeah, we were dry most of the time. So, there's every case is certainly different what you're going to get into. I was impressed there at the amount of things that Campfire had. I was not expecting that. Again, little things probably impressed me, but this was our dining hall. I mean, this was a huge tent, probably held several hundred people, if not 1,000 at capacity. And what was amazing to me was there was a little container at the beginning here. And I thought, what's that for? When you walk in there and it's all the hand washing facilities right there. So I was pretty impressed with, and I can only imagine what that place looked like at the peak of the disaster, because we were there towards the end, and it was still pretty impressive to me. But lots of paperwork, again, rounding, checking the animals each day, treating the animals that were there. This is where we had our headquarters for the ops team. It was an old hospital, we're going to talk about that, but many of these animals here, we were doing bandage change every day or every other day on these animals, or kind of the sick animals in this case. National Guard came in and did a really fantastic job. And again, one of the side benefits, I guess, is the last day we were there, we got to go up to Paradise and drive through. And these pictures probably don't look too dissimilar than what Detroit and some of the other areas look like in Oregon in 2020. So it was kind of awe-inspiring to see what Mother Nature can do. And again, Lynn County, I had minimal involvement there, was not set up under the ICS structure. It was more short-term and lots of horses. And I think it probably wasn't there more than maybe a week, 10 days, something like that. Yeah. So again, each case is going to be different. So I've hopefully answered some of the questions. What are you going to be doing? But it's going to depend on whether it's a natural disaster, an animal disease outbreak, whether you're early or late into the situation. Be prepared to be self-sufficient for a couple of days is what kind of my mantra is. And then my final thought, and I'll stop here if I can get this to advance. There's an old saying, there's two types of people in the world. And you can put that to lots of different ways people do it. But for me, in disaster response, there are two types of people in the world. You can either be a host or you can be a guest. And it's probably self-explanatory, but I always try to be a host when I'm in a disaster. Everybody's under a lot of stress. Everybody's got lots of things going on. And so you try to be as helpful as you can to as many people as you can. And so that's sort of my philosophy. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Mary. Try to minimize this here.
Is thank you all for coming tonight. This is exciting for both Pat and myself, and I think Kate and Ryan too, just to see virtually watching too, that will get kind of pumped up about this. Pat and I are not as young as we once were. There might be some other people, OVERT people that have been in OVERT for a while, and we need to move forward. I mean, most importantly, we need to do things better than we've done them in the past. And that's pretty much my talk tonight. So, and I'm not very good with a PowerPoint, but this is my best effort. I did get Kate gave me a great introduction. I am a graduate of the University of Missouri. I do not want to tell you when I graduated because I'm old and could be of several of you. So, but my practice was Countryside Animal Clinic in Junction City. I took that over when I was 31. I was a solo practitioner most of my time there. I was there 27 years. I joined OVERT in 2007. And as Pat said, yes, the reason for both of us getting more involved in disaster response was Hurricane Katrina. I'm sure quite a few of you were pretty young when Hurricane Katrina occurred, but I think the big takeaway from Hurricane Katrina and the thing that broke our heart is the fact that they had to evacuate, and the bus system, public transit, and all was not set up for people to take their animals with them. And unfortunately, people then said, because you know how strong the bond is, I'm not leaving. And so they did not leave. And so the numbers, if you look at the numbers, they're incredible. 100,000 to 250,000 pets left stranded when the owners did evacuate. And 44% of those people who did not evacuate, they refused to go because they'd have to leave their pets. So, it was a terrible, terrible event and over 1,800 human deaths. So after Katrina, I think this entire nation said, we must do better. So in 2006, got together and said, hey, we need to do something here. So Tom Lantos was a representative from California, and he was one of the primary sponsors of the PET Act of 2006, the Pets Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act, which requires that states' disaster plans address the needs of evacuating pets and service animals along with their people. So Tom Lantos said back then, we will save lives by this because people will not be forced between being with their pets or getting out of the way of a hurricane. Now that's powerful stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of people lost their lives because they weren't going to leave their pets, and we all get that. I was reading something here. Game changer. Pets would not be left behind intentionally again. Today in 2022. So how are we doing in 2022 in our Oregon towns, in our counties, and in the state of Oregon regarding the Pest Act? So that's what that's kind of my focus today. Looking at probably a little more on the local. 2007, I have a friend, Dr. Kathy Snell, who she and I have been working since 2008 or 9 with Lane County. But Kathy went to Hurricane Katrina, and it must have been VMAT at that time. And she spent 3 weeks in Baton Rouge. And so she was my hero because she was able to leave her practice and go do the work that I would have loved to have done. But as a solo practitioner in Junction City, and I was kind of like, nope, I can't get away. So then it was like, okay, what can my focus be to help my clients, help my community and county and state prepare for disasters? Because we need to do better here too. So I joined OVERT, and that was in 2008, I think. And so, the PETS Act had already been signed, and I went to Dr. Hansen and I said, Dr. Hansen, I've been Lane County veterinarian forever. And does Lane County have an animal response plan that I'm not aware of? And I'm just totally out of the loop. And he looked at me and kind of probably gave me an eye roll and said, well, of course not. So since then, and I just decided, okay, somebody's got to do this. So I did go talk to the Lane County emergency manager. We started putting together our task force to work on this. The stakeholders that we need in our communities. Yes, we need the Humane Society was, well, I've always worked with them. And of course, we needed them involved, Lane County Animal Services, the cities of Eugene, Junction City, all of the communities in Lane County, Red Cross. And we needed volunteers for Lane County Animals in Disaster. So I then went to our Veterinary Association and I said, hey, and actually, at that point, we were talking about Dan Jamelka, who was involved. 4 trailers that have been, at that time, and they're still there, have been put in into the state and filled with disaster supplies. And I said, you know what? We've got a lot of money in our bank account for Lane County Animals or Lane County Veterinary Medical Association. I'd been secretary. I knew how much money we had. And I said, let's buy a trailer of our own. So we did. And then that was one thing. And then we raised money to fill that trailer. I became a CERT volunteer. I was doing everything I could to try to make.
A little closer here, the sound's getting a little choppy.
Okay.
On your side there, if you could tuck that in so the antenna's sticking out a little bit more.
Let me get an eye roll. I don't know. But, most importantly, I got involved. I tried to get our community involved. Dr. Snell and I worked really hard. Here's picture of Kathy and I. We did take a CERT course, and as Pat said, your community has a CERT team and get involved in it. That was what we did first, and then we were trainers for our local CERT. Kathy and I probably taught the animal response modules for the community emergency response team in Eugene and Springfield for, 6 or 7 years. Just again, helping people become more aware of response in a disaster situation. Here's a picture of our trailer. Here we were trying to raise money, funds, so we were in Eugene Celebration Parade, we were in all kinds of things. Here's an OVERT picture. I'm sure we were probably drawing blood from chickens. Of high pathogenic avian influenza. So, and here we were, our LK group, we were doing free microchipping at an event for the Humane Society. Here's my dog Hunter. Well, the important thing too, as Dr. Long said, is that we need to prepare ourselves first. Because if you and your family are not prepared, you're not going to be able to leave your family in a safe situation and then go help others. So this was basically my pictures of what my little kit and everything I put together. And there's my dear Hunter. And I don't know if we had children. I don't know where we were going to put them in the car, but we were certainly prepared to take care of Hunter. So our LK project, Lane County Animal Services was part of Health and Human Services in the county. We had full participation of the county. Since 2009, things have kind of not been, they haven't been enthusiastic on the county side. The budget and disaster planning all but disappeared. Lane County Animal Services then became part of Parks and Rec. And then they were moved. And that's where they are today. So then I added this. Meanwhile, Dr. Snell, myself, Green Hill Humane folks keep trying to help the county prepared. And this is how I've felt. This is to be continued because we're still working on this.
Dr. Whitlock, the sound is best when you're facing this way.
Oh, God.
Sorry.
To help. In 2018, I've been working, yes, for helping our community prepare. And then in 2018, the call came, got the email, and yes, Dr. Scholl said that I could go to the Campfire. And so we did have a team of 22. The state of California wanted us, and we had one ODA employee, that was Dr. Schultz. There were the 4 vets that Pat told us about. We took Humane Society people with us. We were going down to help California try to get things straightened out as far as the shelter. But as I was wondering, as we were driving down there, and this was our caravan, we were heading down there, and I was wondering to myself, why is the great state of California contacting us and asking us to help? Because I'm sure I asked Ryan this. I said, I always thought that California was always way ahead of us in every way possible. So why would they need us? So the Campfire, the Butte County fires were catastrophic, as we all know. It was the deadliest, most destructive fire to be in California history at that time. There were 86 fatalities. The 52,000 people were evacuated. There were 26 to 27,000 people alone in Paradise, as the entire town was destroyed. So over 18,000 structures were destroyed. And my understanding is that was 14 to 15,000 homes. So it was a much bigger problem than the state of California could deal with. And thousands of people were displaced. Resources were spread way too thin. Yes, as Pat said, we got in after it began. The Butte officials and the California Office of Emergency Services, they were exhausted mentally and physically 1 month into the Campfire. So we headed down there, and yes, we spent, I don't know, I said 7 nights. I don't know how long it was. We weren't counting. We couldn't count. We were way too tired, but it was right before Christmas. So this was, and that was the Christmas lights that made us happy every night when we'd go find. That I don't make fun of people that wear sleeping masks anymore on planes or anything, because that saved me and allowed me to sleep, because the lights were never really off. And I also used earplugs, because those waxy ones, because the generator was right next to my cot, and you were in the boys' inn. And actually, the sign that my friend and who was Randy, who was my technician in Junction City, were pointing to the sign on our tent that said males. So we had a co-ed tent. So it was an interesting experience. There was quite a bit of snoring, but it wasn't just from the men. I do know that. So here we were in this old hospital that had been closed since closed in 1962. We did not have heat. We did not have running water. it was cold. It was very cold. And there were over 500 animals in the shelter when we arrived. And our understanding at that time is that they were trying to figure out how to close down shelters. And so we would be receiving even more animals as they were trying to close other shelters. So all the dogs were on trazodone and doxycycline when we arrived due to anxiety and kennel cough. We had 75 animals in isolation. Joke, they were there because of upper respiratory, and we were putting on hazmat suits, Tyvek suits, and all that. I mean, there was so much upper respiratory there. I don't know why we did that, but we did. National Guard had been there a couple of weeks. They arrived on the scene after a shelter group who was supposed to be doing the maintenance of the shelter and feeding and all. They decided they were leaving. They'd had enough. So here I am up in our, and I know I probably, maybe I was praying, I don't know. If this was this was tough, but man, did we have a good group on our, when we went to the mess hall, or there was always a quote of the day, and I made a point of taking a picture of it. And usually I pointed out to our group too that we needed to think about what the quote of the day was. So be the reason someone smiles today. And as it went on during our deployment, the harder it was to try to do that. Our team, like you said, 4 veterinarians. We had 2 Oregon State students. They were third-year students. We had 4 CDTs that were, my gosh, I couldn't believe their skills. They were so good. And, by the time we got there, this place was a mess. And it was, and just to tell you, one of the things was we had a lot of stress because there was supposed to be a group, and I think it was San Diego or some humane society that were supposed to, we were having an overlap day when we arrived. And they decided the night before, the day before, that they were going home. So they went home. And so here we are in this old place. We were on the 3rd floor of this building that was ice cold. And here was our heater for our subcutaneous fluids because they were so cold. We certainly needed to do something, but it was tough. Here's Dr. Pat working on a treatment plan. He was great. He gave me a clip. Oh yes, hypnosis for cats. Hypnosis, excuse me. So yes, but it was a lovely group of people that we all worked really hard. And we had heard the rumor on the way down that our days would be at least a 12-hour day. And I think by Grants Pass and In-N-Out Burger, I think everyone is thinking, oh my God, it's going to be at least 12-hour days. And they were. So kept going. Dr. Todd did entropion surgery. We had very few, our medical supplies were very minimal, but hard. The pharmacy was a mess. This room was filled with all these supplies, but nobody had had time to organize all the drugs in the first month. So we went in and we made those changes. So here are pictures, and we're all smiling in these pictures. We could take pictures only of each other. We weren't allowed to take pictures of any animals because there were so many people who were missing their animals. They, if we'd taken a picture of a calico cat, we would have had to come in. People hadn't been allowed into paradise yet, but people would have said, oh, that's my calico cat. So the state said, no, we can't take pictures of pets, but we tried to take pictures of ourselves, and some interesting pictures were taken. But it was tough work. Wounds are still healing. We did have a lot of bandage changes to do. We were very limited in supplies. stress levels were so high that the woman who, the state actually had to call in the state officer because it was such a stress. We were using, I think we were down to what, 0.4 cc's of ketamine and maybe 0.6 cc's of Valium, and a woman whose clinic had not burned but was closed down because of water and smoke damage, and she had been there for a month and we didn't have supplies, but no, there's a lot to learn. So but we left, and I know that we Oregonians met every challenge that was thrown in front of us. So we did go to Paradise on our way home. It's an experience that I'll never forget. I know we gave a lot of comfort to hundreds of people that came through looking for their pets. Forget. So to Dr. Scholes for bringing us together as we all helped each other during this preparation for what was to come to Oregon in 2020. We gave it our all, and yes, I do think we made the state proud of our efforts. And this club, I think, and I said these were probably 7 of the toughest days of my life, which was true. But then farm fire happened. Our fires, the mega fires. I'm sure there's people out here that were involved in it. So I'm just going to go fast through this. I've talked enough. I want to get to the meat of this, which is, were we for this? And no, we weren't. And my heart still hurts for everyone, all the persons and their pets, animals affected by these fires. And we need to do better in our state. We had various, Oregon Humane, the VCA hospitals, Oregon Veterinary Specialty Center down in the Talent and Phoenix area, where those 2 towns, of course, were totally devastated by the fire. OSU volunteers, we need to get to work. And the question is, did our LK plan help us? And the purpose of the LK plan, and probably most of the county plans, which will be on the same template that we use that came from the state, is to minimize animal suffering and human anguish during a disaster by providing guidance on the following: immediate care and control of animals, temporary sheltering of companion and farm animals, emergency veterinary care to injured companion and farm animals, and a system for returning animals to their owners after a disaster event is over. So there's a big role in the veterinary profession to play in disaster response. These are just some pictures that I took. Actually, I had very few pictures of the Holiday Farm, or my involvement in the Holiday Farm fire, because we were too busy to take pictures. At 3 weeks after the Holiday Farm fire started up the McKenzie on September 7th, and 21 days asking us they needed to record volunteer hours. And I had 207 hours that at that point in 3 weeks. And as I said, no, we didn't have time, but this was an event that it was up the McKenzie. It wasn't the South Hills of Eugene, which a fire that begins in a situation where this is Junction City on that first day when the wind was blowing so hard and just spinning around, and that's what the sky looked like. And a spark could have set off all of many of our communities. So So we did work very hard. We set up a veterinary triage center. We sheltered animals that with no owner. We set up contingency plans, getting other veterinary clinics involved. We did a lot of work. And this is just a picture of my well-worn plan for animals in disaster, Lane County, and it has a date of 2011. And it is still in the process of being revised because I looked at the county's website yesterday under disaster response. So we did a lot of work. We distributed 34 pounds of pet food. We made sure we had veterinary coverage at the fairgrounds. Towards the end, we did do Dave from the U.S. Humane Society spent 2 weeks with us, and we learned how to do humane trapping of cats up the river, and that was quite interesting, and it was very important that humane trapping was done properly, and that's something that we will take with us in the future. This was a cute little squirrel that came down from upriver, and we had a wildlife veterinarian that was tremendously in dealing with sin baby squirrel. So does your county have a disaster plan? Our county did not. Your county may not either. Even if your county does have a plan, are they utilizing it, and do they need your help? So speak up, talk to your county, see if they do have a disaster response plan in place, help them develop it if they don't. Join OVERT. We all need to join OVERT, and because we've got to the biggie is we need to be able to take care of ourselves at home, be prepared at home, prepare for disasters and be ready. So that's our cities. We need to help our counties prepare. And most importantly, we as veterinarians should be involved with the state and our local communities to bring it all together. So, I have here that I'm excited about the OSU, the OVA program is now starting to be created, because we can create this disaster program that can make our veterinary profession shine. This is something where we know it's our responsibility to do it here in the state of Oregon. I'll leave you with this. Thank you for coming. I did go back to my alma mater, University of Missouri, just a couple of 3 weeks ago. This is a mural that's on the wall outside of the dean's office, and I took a picture of it because this word cloud comes responses from CVM students and were prompted by question. What veterinary medicine means to me. I thought that was very interesting. And I thought that that's a lot of words, and all of them are very appropriate. And I think we can all say we're proud that we're part of this profession. Thank you, and I'm done.
Still Matt from
You can have it.
Yeah.
I don't ever want.
You guys might have to answer some questions. So I'll hold it for you. I don't know, does anybody here that's in the flesh have questions for Mary, Pat? We've got Ryan, Dr. Scholes here too. Or myself, anyone? Maybe take some questions from the in virtual world.
That one came in.
Okay.
Says, Something many potential volunteers think about is liability and remunerations. What have been your experiences?
Hear that question, okay, about liability.
So maybe I'm a little naive, but I guess I don't worry too much about the liability. I mean, I think I'm trying to do good, and maybe I should. I do obviously carry professional liability insurance. Ryan may be able to address that a little bit because as veterinarians in Oregon, very few of us were licensed in California. So Ryan may be able to address that. And the remuneration, actually, I have been paid but for some of the responses I've done through NAHERC and Health and Human Services, and actually OVERT too. We were reimbursed for that. And it was maybe not at the top end of the pay scale, but it was certainly worthwhile.
And it wasn't expected. I did not expect to be paid.
Ryan, do you want to address the liability issue? Because you could probably address that myself.
Yes. Issue is one where that's why it's so important to respond through official channels. If you show up to a shelter and start just looking, you're on your own liability coverage. If you do it through the community, so if you're involved at a county level, generally you're covered by the county response policy. If you do it through OVERT at a state level, we actually have statutory language that you are covered as a deputy state veterinarian if you deploy under our authority. And generally that also allows us to be able to provide some payment in certain cases, depending on the situation, depending on the scenario. There are definitely opportunities to volunteer as well on that.
Come in, several people have asked, how can they get involved as vet med students, both recommendations to get started and then kind of ongoing, and what resources should they be aware of?
And feel free, anybody else, to chime in on this too. I think we definitely need some student involvement, and there will be efforts for you guys to join us in this planning process. Participating in the future say reach out to me directly and I'm going to put you to work tomorrow. And you can also join OVERT. Dr. Schultz just piped in there as well.
And I would say veterinary technicians are very important too. We certainly do not want to exclude them. They are really.
Yeah, veterinary technicians, I mean, in general, right? We don't function without them. Especially needed. Did you have a question, comment? Oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering, with your Lane County experience, what kind of, have you done any type of outreach or advertising about joining this effort to local veterinarians, and how do you go about that? Because I know a lot of veterinarians don't necessarily know that this is actually available to them, and there are roadblocks, I feel like, with busy practicing veterinarians, especially right now with it.
So, and just for the people virtually, because I don't know how well they can hear without the microphone, the question was about Lane County outreach and the ability to be involved as a veterinarian down there.
Two-part question, but how reaching out to let people know that this is available, and also maybe ways to overcome roadblocks.
So ways to overcome roadblocks, and how have you reached out to people to get them involved?
Well, I think, unfortunately, the biggest roadblock that we've had in Lane County is Lane County, and which doesn't make me happy at all, because the involvement of myself and Dr. Snell, our initial stakeholders that started this in 2009, and we're still working on this, Green Hill Humane Society, myself, Dr. Snell, and we're working, the county, as I said, in 2009, we had a great support, and we have probably throughout those years, 13 years, We've had numerous meetings, where we put up flyers in our veterinary clinics, and we probably would have, and initially we set up, we had people that signed up. We have training modules on our website where people were credentialing to become members. Unfortunately, it boiled down to Dr. Snell and I, we can't do it alone. And that's the roadblock. And that's why you need these stakeholders all to buy in. But the county must buy in too. And I think that's my beating my head against the wall. I'm not finished yet with Lane County. And, and I will take this discussion where we're strengthening ourselves on the state level. Okay, wake up. It's time to do your part. Answer your question.
Thanks, Mary.
More question. Non-certified veterinary professionals participate in disaster planning and response. So assistants, shelter kennel staff.
Okay, so how can non-certified veterinary professionals participate in disaster response? I don't know. There we go.
Green Hill Humane Society is working on a disaster plan that will be her program that will then, yes, allow the veterinary, all of us that were involved in our response for the holiday fire. We will, going back to LCAID, or Lane County Animals in Disaster, that was what we're supposed to do, but it's dropped the ball. So we're taking it from another angle. And yes, we will need all those people for shelter work, for data entry. It's to be done by non-certified veterinary people, especially in shelter type situations.
Thinking through that, my initial response would be to volunteer for becoming a member of CERT, Community Emergency Response, maybe then checking with the local shelters to see if they have any programs. Then number 3, I would probably go to the county that you live in, the emergency manager, express that interest. And then I know at Lynn County last year, the extension folks were called in to do a lot of the non-veterinary work, the setting up the shelter and feeding and watering. And so I guess that would be a 4th, but that's probably lower on the list. But CERT would probably be the first response.
Thank you.
Have there been any efforts in educating fire first responders to treat animals until veterinarians arrive? Or maybe an answer about kind of that interaction between veterinarians and emergency response folks?
Okay, so the question was about like efforts for firefighters or other first responders to be trained to work with animals until veterinary help can arrive.
Not aware of anything locally. I know, talking to some folks in California, alpaca owners, they have volunteered to go talk to fire departments so that those departments know how to deal with an animal that they may not normally see. So I think that would be incumbent upon the stakeholders, the animal owners, to approach the first responders and say, hey, we help educate you, and that would be where I'd start there.
Yeah, and I mean, part of that like technical large animal like rescue course, I believe that the like Oregon Horse Council is putting on would involve some of that as well. And I don't know if there's still spots open for the like lab participation part, but Ryan's also got his hand up here.
Over the years, I'd say the first thing is, as a veterinarian, vet student, vet tech, whatever, reach out to your local fire department and ask. Ask if they've had those kind of trainings. I mean, who better to give that training than you as a local veterinary professional working with your local community responders. At the state level, we do work a lot with the State Fire Marshal's Office, who oversees local fire defense boards. And we've done some work with them, especially around livestock in some of these large wildland fires and the urban interface fires we get, and we do a lot of work on that, but not so much training for individual, responder treating animals until vets can get there. We tend not to see those kind of situations all that frequently anyways. We try to encourage them to, involve vets early if they are seeing that kind of a situation. But really a lot of the places we get involved in these disaster responses is more the shelters once the animals have been evacuated down out of the burn zones and treating them there.
For local disasters, can you talk a bit about how folks who are working or studying could maybe still work around those family work responsibilities, but be involved in disaster response efforts in their community?
So the question was about how can people be involved when they have responsibilities at home, and I assume to maybe do their solo practices, but still be involved in disaster response and helping their community.
Here is, we need more people trained to help in this response, because there will be people in the group. In Wayne County, a perfect example was we didn't see animal control guy for almost a week, and he was responsible for the large animal end of it because he and his horses were evacuated from the fire zone, and so he wasn't available. Again, as I said, that just means that we need more people involved. So geographically, people involved in the fire zone or the whatever the disaster is, the flooded area or whatever, there's others to come help. Again, I stress that, yes, it is hard. Your home, veterinary clinic practice owners need to have their practices prepared. If you're in a clinic, if you have your business, you need to make sure your practice is prepared for disaster response. So there's a lot of things that, yes, you need to do before you can, and you've got to take care of your family first. If you're in your practice on whatever, these practices, and I know at least one practice in Talon or Phoenix that did burn, got to make sure that you safely evacuate people and you're prepared in your practice. So it's hard to get to that point where you can participate, but that's why planning needs to happen. And I don't think veterinary practices were probably really busy those first few days of the holiday farm fire, other than people calling and needing to board animals and things like that. But just, you have to do it. And we're all busy, and it takes a lot of busy people to get things done in the world.
This response, but as things pop in my head, and obviously, people, work goes on, life goes on. You may not be able to take that time off, but and one issue is, if you can only volunteer 2 or 3 hours a day, you might have 2 hours of training for 2 hours work, and so this doesn't work very well in a disaster. So you may think about things. If you've got a practice, you donate food, you donate maybe drugs to help treat those animals, and financial support is hardly ever turned down. So those would be my response to how you could help if your work or your other life keeps you from actually being a volunteer. So those would be the things I would think of.
Does OSU allow their staff, CBT staff, to have the time off to deploy for these disasters? Is that something that's ever been brought up, or do they compensate their staff? Like, do you have any idea how, or is there any work to be done to?
So I can only comment, I guess, on how it worked in 2020. I mean, the, like, field service veterinarian, it kind of felt like just part of my job to go out and be there. I guess with the other emergency work that I do on my job, there's no additional compensation for it. It's just part of the gig. I wasn't like designated to be on call for the days that this fire ended up happening, but ultimately was. And it was 12-hour or more, I feel like, days for sure. But
Like Kimmy, for existence.
yeah.
Like
So
time off, like.
and I think that I will say that the dean's office and the like teaching hospital are really supportive of the vet school being like involved. And so I don't think there's a formal arrangement or anything set up in that regard, but I think that ultimately they would do their best to make it right within their means, but there isn't anything set up. Here, Ryan's got his hand.
Also, going back to the original question of, you know, how to make this work in a busy life. And I think that the original question kind of hit on that too, that local, you know, how to be involved locally. So I've been the state lead for animal disasters for almost 10 years now, and we've had one Labor Day fire incident. You know, one incident that got to that level, right? We had 33 large-scale shelters in 20 counties at once. But we have half a dozen or more small incidents all the time. You know, and those may be, you know, a rotation of 2 or 3 vets spending 2 hours each, you know, rotating through one vet there in the morning, one vet in the afternoon to do quick routes for 20 animals that are being sheltered for 3 or 4 days. And so, you know, being involved at the local, you know, does your CERT team, you know, does your county have CERT teams that you can get involved in and help at that local level? You know, those CERT teams will help provide some of that early training. You know, these trainings will help provide that. And that involvement at the county can look like in a lot of different ways. And I think Mary's kind of said this too, I'll paraphrase a little bit, but that many hands make light work. And the more professionals we can get involved, the less of a burden it is on any one veterinarian, any one technician, any one person involved in that response. So not every response is a 10-day deployment or a 3-week deployment, or, you know, those are the banner ones in our careers. You know, there's ideally a lot of small ones where we can get involved in and help things go smoothly over every couple of years.
For those of you here in the audience, Dean Tornquist is online, and she said that she would support any request for CCBN employees to participate in disaster response. Has your back. Another question online was, what counties or states in the nation should we be looking toward to emulate and learn from, and like, you know, who's doing it best and how can we learn from that?
So the question was, what counties in the state of Oregon should we be looking to try to emulate and are doing a good job currently?
Or counties and states
Or
outside.
Or outside of Oregon. Yeah, who's the model?
So there's a lot of counties around Oregon that have different plans. You know, some of them work really well. Some of them work for them that wouldn't work anywhere else. You know, the Portland metro area has a great plan, a great team. You know, but they've got more animal control officers within the 3 Portland metro area counties than I think the entire rest of the state does. So their plan relies heavily on that. They've got, you know, large NGOs up there. And they do a great job. There's, you know, some tiny counties around the state that have really good plans that work for, you know, when you only have 10,000 people in your whole county. That works. Douglas County is another one that jumps to mind that's been doing this a lot of years and does. I mean, they've consistently sent resources that they have to help other counties while they're in the middle of, you know, responding to 3 different fires in their county. In terms of other states, there's a number of counties in California that do a really good job. The South tends to have some really good resources out of Like Louisiana has some good resources. Texas does. Those states that get hit by hurricanes every year, a couple times a year, tend to have really good resources on how to respond and for counties and local municipalities. Not all of them call them counties, but for local municipalities and how they respond with animals.
What's your question?
I was just wondering if you guys have that little picture of the squirrel, is that like kind of like accident, or are there any like specific like teams for wildlife or targets to get wildlife at all?
So the question was, what about teams or training efforts with regards to wildlife in disasters?
So there's two sides of that. One is the owned exotic wildlife type species that tend to show up at shelters. I got a call during the Labor Day fires from a woman that we work with that told me that she had a semi-truck with 80 large exotic cats in it that they were about to show up at the state fairground shelter. Luckily, we diverted that truck somewhere else. So we did those kinds of things. I'm not sure we're trained to handle them. We did. Wildlife themselves, so the Department of Fish and Wildlife works really closely with responders in that. Here in Oregon, wildlife in Oregon are owned by the state of Oregon. And they tend to take a fairly hands-off approach to it, because wildlife are not in an area where you're normally necessarily encountering. They actually move out of the way of fires pretty well, but they either move out of the way or they don't. And you don't tend to have concentrations. Where we see the issues is where you have a house that has a couple pets that didn't get evacuated, or a cattle ranch that they got the cattle moved into a corral, got 2 truckloads out and went back for the third, and the evacuation order was already in place and couldn't get back for the third. It's those type of situations. You don't tend to see as many wildlife. You see one-offs, the baby squirrel that showed up and those kind of things. And a lot of times the wildlife rehab centers will take those and handle those, or they come to a shelter and we get the right people connected up in that case. But in terms of dedicated teams, not so much for these kind of events, but then you start looking at like oil spills. And there's a huge network of Oregon, or the Marine Mammal Stranding Network, where you have other types of emergencies that happen that do impact specific groups of wildlife, and we definitely see those kind of networks around. The wildlife rehabbers are probably one of the biggest ones.
Is that also like through OVERT, or would that be completely?
No, so the wildlife rehab centers are generally actually like brick and mortar facilities that do that, and many of them do have veterinarians on staff. The vet that Mary was talking about was a vet from one of the wildlife rehab centers. Actually, one of the vets we took down to California with us was a vet for a wildlife rehab center up in the gorge that did a lot of avian work. But they tend to be more brick and mortar facilities. They're licensed through the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they do that on an everyday basis already. Yeah.
Thank you.
Emails with first flu. We know it's all knocking on and that.
The question was with regards to bird flu and what the state is planning, expecting.
New district vets up here are heckling me, and if they're not careful, they're gonna get nominated to answer the question. So we have a state response plan. Changed a little bit how they respond to influenza if it's not a commercial operation. And they don't do quite as much of the quarantine and surveillance around the facilities like we did back in 2015. So the hope is that as long as it's a non-commercial, backyard flock, there'd be a little less need. OVERT's going to factor largely in that, likely, if we have an outbreak, because I've got 3 people on my staff and USDA. Right now, we have 1 USDA vet in the state. They're all deployed back east. At the same time, it may still miss us this spring. When you look at the map and the migrations, The cases that have been happening have been following the Atlantic, the Mississippi, and the Central Flyways. Even those Idaho cases that were just announced are kind of right on that edge between the farthest western edge of the Central Flyway and the eastern edge of the Pacific. We're kind of hoping maybe that was the Central Flyway. We haven't seen any indications further west of any of the virus in our flyway yet. We're expecting to have it in the fall. We're doing a lot of biosecurity outreach and hoping that maybe we can head it off that way. But yeah, it's going to be a response the same as we've always done, where it's a quarantine
So
an
if the
area.
backyard fox starts losing some birds, we're supposed to report you first.
Yeah,
Or we send them to us.
yeah. So we have a hotline that we have set up for as a veterinarian. It's reporting it just the same as any other reportable disease, and we'll work with you to be able to get those tested. In your case, you can just walk across the street and drop it off at the lab. We'll let you do that. There are, and even more so than there were 7 years ago when we dealt with this last time. COVID that was one of the big things that came out of COVID is everyone bought chickens. There've been commercial hatcheries for several years now because of that. And so it's a different landscape now with those. And so, yeah, we're doing a lot of outreach on biosecurity right now in preparation for it. Yeah.
Right. Any other questions from the audience here? Thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise and knowledge. I'm really glad, Dr. Scholes, that you were able to make it too. And thank you to everyone that came both virtually and in person. And I look forward to more and better.
Yeah, so they're